Hello again, Year 8, and thank you for joining me for the second part of today's lesson. So at the end of the previous video, I left you with this task to create a mind map about the 19th century using the questions below to guide you. All right, so I just thought I'd go through the answers to those questions just so you can check them against what you have written on your mind map. But it's all about the 19th century. So one question asked what was abolished, and it was slavery that was abolished. There was a question that asked about the Industrial Revolution, which included a movement from the country to the city, agriculture to factories. The next question, Queen Victoria was the reigning monarch at the time. Inventions such as the telephone, the typewriter and the automobile were created, but these developments worried some people because they feared it would corrupt and harm nature. And also there was that link to Charles Darwin and his On the Origin of Species, what impact did that have? And it says that people in Britain began to question their faith as Darwin's discoveries questioned the existence of God. If there's any extra information there you didn't already have down, you might like to pause a moment and add that to your mind map. But when you're ready, I'm going to carry on to the next part of the presentation. So, what texts have been looked at so far as parts of remote learning? And there are two key ones that have been looked at. We've looked at the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and we've also looked at stories to do with Jack the Ripper. And we'll go into a bit more detail about each of these as we move forward, again, just while we're recapping some of the key information to do with the topic we've covered so far. So, as a brief recap on the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is by Robert Louis Stevenson, and it is a narrative about the complexities of science and the duplicity of human nature. Dr. Jekyll is a kind, well-respected and intelligent scientist who meddles with the darker side of science as he wants to bring out his second nature. He does this through transforming himself into Mr. Hyde, his evil alter ego who doesn't repent or accept responsibility for his evil crimes and ways. Jekyll tries to control his alter ego Hyde, and for a while, Jekyll has the power. However, towards the end of the novel, Hyde takes over and this results in both their deaths. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is look at this key word here. If this is a word you have looked at before, please feel free to skip ahead and move on to the next part. But if you have not come across this word before, it's a really important word to be aware of when talking about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And this word here is duality. And what this means is the state or quality of being two or in two parts, a dichotomy. The belief that there are two parts to humanity. And in an example, it's just to use that word we're thinking about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We are looking at the character as being two parts. Obviously, you have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde both forming the same person. So if you don't already have this word written down, or if you haven't come across this word before, please take the word and get that definition down as well. So it's a really important word for you to know. So pause the video to do that and then move on when you're ready. But that's what I'm going to do now. So it's a key concept to be aware of duality in literature. We have already learned that writers through their texts often allow us an insight into the human condition and what it is to be human. Many writers have explored the duality of the human condition and man's capacity for both good and evil. And this is true of the work of great literature that we will study overall today, okay, looking into what humans are capable of and what humans experience at different periods of time. But why was the book so scary in the 19th century? Why were so many people scared about the book? So The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde made people think about themselves and their personalities. They began to fear that they too had an evil side that only had to be drawn out. Advances in science at this time added to this fear, especially because it is through scientific experiments that Dr. Jekyll manages to bring forth Mr. Hyde. In the green box at the bottom there, a little fun did you know? Much like other Gothic novels of the time, this book was written as a series of letters and diary entries, and on publishing it, Stevenson told everyone these were real accounts. Which would have terrified people because they thought it was real, all right, saying that these were a collection of letters and whatnot that he's just decided to publish. You also never hear from the perspective of Jekyll or Hyde in the text, only from people who keep seeing them, which added to the fear factor of the novel. It made it all seem really quite real, which would have scared a lot of readers at this time. Okay then, so based on the information we have just covered, I've got to summarise the text, copy and complete here for you. You've got a paragraph there on the screen and some keywords on the right. Your task is to fill it in. So the paragraph says, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a book that focuses on of man as undergoes a variety of science experiments that splits him from his evil side, who becomes a separate person known as. The text invoked fear in the reader because it made them wonder if they also had and they feared the possibility of this coming forward, especially because of the advancement of at this time. The structure of the novel also invoked fear in the reader, as it is presented as a collection of real from people who observed both Jekyll and Hyde. So pause the video here, copy down that summary there, and make sure you include those keywords in the correct places. Press play when you're ready, and I will go through the answers and you can mark your own work. Okay, hopefully by now you've managed to have a go at that. So let's move forward and consider the answers. And this is how it should look, all right, connecting those keywords into the correct spaces there. So The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a book that focuses on the duality of man, as Dr. Jekyll undergoes a variety of science experiments that splits him from his evil side, who becomes a separate person known as Mr. Hyde. The text invoked fear in the reader because it made them wonder if they also had an evil side, and they feared the possibility of this coming forward, especially because of the advancement of science at this time. The structure of the novel also invoked fear in the reader, as it is presented as a collection of real letters from people who observed both Jekyll and Hyde. If you need to make any changes to your copy that you've written down, please do so. If you got them right, well done you. So if you need to pause the video for a moment just to edit anything, please do. Otherwise, I shall carry on. But well done if you managed to get those right. Okay, another key word to introduce to you here then. If this is a word you haven't looked at yet, then please make a note to get down the keyword there, malevolent, and also the definition over here, which is showing a wish to do evil to others. Those are the two main things to get down, are the keyword there and the definition. If it's one you've already come across and learned about before, then you can move ahead. But if you haven't, then please do that. Pause the video and do that now. But once you've done that, we shall carry on with the video. So the other character that has been looked at so far within this unit is Jack the Ripper. Now, Jack the Ripper is a popular name given to a serial killer who murdered 5 women in the East End of London in 1888. The name was first used in a letter written by an individual claiming to be the killer. The Ripper was the first serial killer in a major modern city with an educated populace. What that means, the populace is the population, and educated means people who had a good education, okay? His crimes were well documented by the police and the press. Newspapers were cheap and readership was considerable. The Ripper appeared during a time of political turmoil and social unrest. The Ripper terrified a city by leaving his grossly mutilated victims in plain sight. And importantly, the Ripper was never caught. Why was the Ripper not caught? It is difficult to catch a serial killer who does not want to be caught because the victims are usually unknown to the criminal and it is hard to establish a link. In the 1880s, forensic science was in its infancy. The basic tools of modern criminology, such as fingerprinting, blood typing, or DNA, were unavailable to investigators. And the Ripper attacked at times when the streets were largely deserted, and he chose victims who were usually drunk and defenseless. The Ripper attacked swiftly, leaving little time for him to be caught. He also managed to leave the scene without witnesses or leaving any evidence as to his identity. And what we're going to do here is just very quickly look at a description of Jack the Ripper and just talk a little bit about how he is presented. So how does the writer use language to describe Jack the Ripper in the first paragraph? I'll read this through. If you want to pause and read it through yourself as well, that's absolutely fine. But what we're looking for are descriptions of Jack the Ripper to help us with the next task. London lies today under the spell of a great terror. A nameless reprobate, half beast, half man, is at large, who is daily gratifying his murderous instincts on the most miserable and defenseless classes of our community. There can be no shadow of a doubt now that our original theory was correct, and that the Whitechapel murderer, who has now 4, if not 5 victims to his knife, is one man, and that man a murderous maniac. There is a murderer in our midst. Hideous malice, deadly cunning, insatiable thirst for blood. All these are the marks of the mad homicide. The ghoul-like creature who stalks through the streets of London, stalking down his victim like a Pawnee Indian, is simply drunk with blood, and he will have more. The question is, what are the people of London to do? Whitechapel is garrisoned with police and stocked with plainclothed men. Nothing comes of it. The police have not even a clue. They are in despair at their utter failure to get so much as a scent of the criminal. So what we're looking for here are just any descriptions specifically of Jack the Ripper. So if you want to take a moment just to make note of any of those, that'd be really useful just to move on to the next task. So pause the video here to do so before we move on. But I will move on here now. So your last thing to do today, what I would like you to do is to write one not only but also sentence that summarises the presentation of the Ripper in that extract that we have just read. And this is the sentence starter you can use here. Through their use of language, the writer not only presents the Ripper as, but also as. So your task is, using your own words, is to write how the Ripper is presented within the text. Okay, so you might want to think of some describing words, some descriptive words, some adjectives to help you fill in those gaps. But I want you to finish off that sentence using your own words about how you think the Ripper is presented in that extract. Pause the video, have a go, look back at the extract if you need to help you with this. All right, but get that sentence written down, and then play the video again as we come to the end. Okay, so hopefully by now you've managed to have a go at that task. And with that, that was the final task for today's lesson. So today's aims were to recap what the aims of this topic are, which I think we've covered, to revisit contextual detail relevant to the topic. We talked all about the 19th century, so that's really good. And to recap the texts already covered as part of the unit. We were looking back at a couple of the texts we've looked at, which were about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and then also Jack the Ripper. Please don't forget to upload your work to your teacher for today, but otherwise that is it from me. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you.